We all took control over different aspects of the final products. I was in charge of the typography for the trailer, poster and website. We had originally planned to use quite a simple font for the main typography, and I had done a Photoshop practical testing this out. However, we decided this was far too basic to be our main typography and therefore did not use it. To make the typography for the poster, I used Photoshop, where I began by writing Zada onto the photo we had chosen after doing 2 different photo shoots of Georgia. I wrote this in a relatively thin pen with my mouse, and I went over this with lots of small brush lines to make it thicker but appearing messy still. I then duplicated the layer multiple times, so I had lots of different variations of the word Zada. I moved these around and placed them around the original title and changed the opacity of them. Some were more opaque than others. Most of the layers were of a low opacity so that they were quite subtle compared to the main title that I had drawn. I then repeated these steps for the I and the M. In order to make the typography for a trailer, I followed the same steps as for the poster. However, I made each word in an individual Photoshop document so they could be moved separately and placed in the correct place over the final shot of Georgia opening her eyes. We decided after finishing the typography that it didn't look bold enough to be the final typography, and therefore I made some amendments. I went over the lines of the typography to make them thicker and bolder, and I then changed the saturation and exposure of the end shot so the typography stood out more. Lastly, in order to make the typography for the website, I first deconstructed some different film websites of random genres to get a feel for what ours should look like. I then focused on film websites of the social realism genre to look at the typography conventions that were more specific. I used the same typography that I had used for the trailer, which meant that there was a common theme between the trailer and the film website. I placed each word into Wix and then placed them around the image of Georgia.
I was specifically in charge of sound creation and editing for our final product. I took inspiration from My Dream, My Reality, which I deconstructed, and found that the voiceover worked well with the slow soundtrack whilst also creating a connection between protagonist and audience.
But a man entered the room and closed the door behind him.
I then wanted to deconstruct a similar clip but focus specifically on voiceover. I deconstructed a clip from Comic Relief, Ida's story, and took inspiration from what she spoke about. This included the mention of her family, how she prayed it would be over, and how she tried to escape. I also came to the conclusion, after looking at both My Dream, My Reality and Ida's story, that using a foreign accent would be most effective and realistic, especially as Georgia was playing a Syrian refugee. Georgia, however, did not have a foreign accent, and so we had to explore our options and came to the decision to use a foreign language assistant from our school. To make good use of our time, I planned the voiceover before we filmed our shots and then waited until all the shots were in the right order in Final Cut before editing the voiceover in. Initially, the foreign language assistant wasn't free at the time we needed, so I recorded Georgia speaking the voiceover on my phone and placed each sound clip in the right shot. This allowed me to know where each sound clip went in preparation for the actual voiceover recording to make it more efficient. When it came to recording the foreign language assistant, we used a soundproof room so that there was no background noise. For the soundtrack, I deconstructed sound in human trafficking trailers and noticed that they all had soundtracks which would cause an audience to either react with fear due to increased volumes and loud booming sounds, or sympathy due to more somber soundtracks. The soundtrack for Stopping Traffic particularly interested me, as it consisted of soft, high-pitched piano notes which invoked pity within the audience. As we also wanted our audience to feel sympathetic when watching our trailer, I found a similar soundtrack, which sounded like this. This was effective as it had both high and low piano notes and fluctuated volumes to create tension.
Our trailer was further inspired by the short film My Dream, My Reality through the post-production lighting in the trafficker's basement, where we wanted to show the contrast between relative equilibrium and disequilibrium relating to Todorow's theory of narrative, and chose to do this through the lighting. In the first establishing shots of London buses driving past and long shots of trains, we used high saturation and high key lighting to create a warmer atmosphere. I did this by opening the colour board and turning up the midtones and highlights. In the montage of the girl sat on the mattress in the trafficker's house, I used the brightness and contrast menu to drag the saturated colours towards the darker blue in order to create a dark atmosphere, as well as turning down saturation and put shadows on the footage to represent it to be more negative.